Look at a light map of America. Do you notice anything? You might first think about the distinct difference between the west and east coast when it comes to light, or you might notice the bright shine of Chicago. But I almost guarantee you'll notice the continuous light pollution of this string of cities in the northeast. This is the most iconic megalopolis in the United States, home of some of America's best history and most beautiful cities. So today that's what we're going to talk about. We'll go through the cities one by one and talk about their population growth throughout history, and then address some of the culture and problems here. Before that though, I wanted to please ask if you'd consider subscribing to the channel. I have 3 other Megalopolis videos currently on the channel, and plan to post another for every single megalopolis in the country. So if this topic interests you, please click that subscribe button. Thank you. So the Northeast Megalopolis stretches 500 miles up the Atlantic coast, hitting 10 major metropolitan areas on its way. All of these together add up to an absurd 52 million residents. So let's go through these metros one by one and give you a rundown, starting as far south as Richmond. So Richmond has a very different feel from the rest of the Northeast Megalopolis. It doesn't feel very mid-Atlantic, but pretty clearly southern. That's part of what makes me not like including it in the Megalopolis. But simply because I think now it pretty clearly connects, I kind of have to talk about it. So going as far back as 1900, the Richmond MSA had a population of 143,000, going to 436,000 in 1950 and 1.3 million in 2020. Over the course of history, its growth has stayed pretty consistent, improving by 204% in the first 50-year period and then 201% in the second 70-year period. Something I find so interesting about Richmond is that it's right on the edge of what I'd call a southern city, and geographically it doesn't feel like it at all. But culturally and historically, it's one of the most southern cities in the Union. Going back to the Civil War era, the city has always been closer with somewhere like Charleston than somewhere like Baltimore, and I think it gives the city a very unique feel. Next we have Washington, D.C., our nation's beautiful capital. In 1900, the MSA had a population of 570,000, improving to 1.4 million in 1950, then to 6.3 million in 2020. That's some crazy population growth, going as high as 337% between 1950 and 2020. It's safe to say Washington has completely changed in the last 70 years. Cities like Manassas and Gaithersburg have gone from simple suburbs to pretty important cities. The whole area has gone from the nation's capital to one of the largest metros in the country. Next we have Baltimore, which is arguably one metro area connected with D.C., since they've become pretty clearly intertwined, and nobody can tell me where D.C. ends and Baltimore starts. So Baltimore had a population of 639,000 in 1900, going up to 1.3 million in 1950, which is pretty importantly barely less than Washington, D.C. had at that time. But between 50 and 2020, the population has only grown to 2.8 million, which is still a fine increase, but it's been sort of shadowed by its brother to the south, growing about 200% less. Now there's no denying Baltimore has some problems. The main city is fighting its hardest to become the worst city in the country, and there's no denying it's become a pretty scary place. Now unlike Gary or Camden, I will say a lot of people who live in Baltimore don't hate it, because there's a unique feel, and not all row homes are bad. But the city is not becoming a better place in my opinion, and it could definitely use some work. Next up we have the Delaware Valley Metro, which is Wilmington, Philadelphia, and Trenton, combined into one megacity because my stats guy didn't know where the borders were between the 3 cities. So Delaware Valley has been a pretty big place going as far back as 1800, where it had a population of 61,000. But the population explosion in the next century is something not seen in many places, growing by 3,092% to 1.9 million in 1900. Then 3.7 million in 1950, and 6.1 million in 2020. So through the past century or so, the population hasn't been making insane strides, allowing a lot of growing metropolitan areas to pass it on the list. So it may have fallen from grace in a sense, but it's still one of the most historic and recognizable cities in the country. Next we have New York, which needs no introduction. In 1900, it had a population of 5.2 million, growing to 13.2 million in 1950, and 20 million in 2020. Now the growth in the last 70 years is only 51%, but there's no need to blame the city, because doubling in population when you already have tens of millions is not as easy as it sounds. So just having the steady gain it's currently seeing is enough. Now everyone has heard about New York, so just explaining what the city is doesn't feel helpful to the video, so I thought I'd speak on the sheer population of Long Island, something I feel like not a lot of people really think about. If Long Island incorporated into one city, it would be number 2 on America's biggest cities list, at 7.6 million. Long Island is constant urban and suburban development the whole way, with only a few areas not being 100% populated. From New York City to the Hamptons, it's seriously just one large city that I can't even call suburban at this point because it's so dense for current American standards. It's just a really unique place, especially because of how it's pretty much disconnected from the rest of the world, besides ferries and going through NYC. It's super cool. Next, we have Hartford, Connecticut, which importantly is almost as big as Richmond, something I think is not really thought about. Hartford may be overshadowed by the rest of the megalopolis, but it on its own has a population of 1.2 million. Between 1950 and 2020, it did have the slowest gain of any city on the list, though, at only 44%. Now, Hartford is definitely rough around the edges, with some pretty major problems. It's no Baltimore, but the crime rate isn't low. You can find some pretty bad neighborhoods that if you weren't from here and saw, you might be really confused on what city you were actually in. But there are a lot of nice areas there. Next, we have Providence, the capital of Rhode Island. The city has seen a gain of 70% between 1900 and 1950, and 53% between 1950 and 2020, ending now at a population of 1.6 million. Now, Providence is a better place than Hartford, there's no denying that. But I also think it needs to be said that there are some pretty bad neighborhoods here. Something that doesn't really come to mind when talking about Providence, Rhode Island. Now, this city definitely has a New England-y feel to it, being a lot more like Boston than like New York. There's a lot less row homes and much more 2- or even 3-story neighborhood houses. It's somewhere I'd love to visit someday. Finally, we have Boston, which had a population of 1.8 million in 1900, 3 million in 1950, and now 5 million in 2020. Boston is widely considered to be a top 10 city in the US, with tons of history, a beautiful New England feel, and an iconic harbor area. I personally am not as much of a fan as other people, but there's no denying it's a really cool place. The city has many high-end colleges and museums, with so much stuff going on in the city. The downtown is, in the words of the great geography king, very walkable. So you also have that going for it, I guess. Anyways, that's all the cities on the list, so let's go over some interesting aspects, starting off with the main thing the Northeast Megalopolis has going for it, the history. So more so than anywhere else in the US, this megalopolis has been so important to the development of America as a whole. Washington, D.C. is the capital, Philadelphia is the home of the Liberty Bell and Independence Hall, New York is New York for goodness sake, Boston had the Tea Party, and so much more. Even the baseball stadiums show history, with Camden Yards seeing an old warehouse in the right field side, Yankee Stadium having a very short right field to fit in with the rail line behind the stadium, and Fenway Park has the iconic green monster, so the stadium could fit in with the street directly behind it. You see this kind of stuff all over in the megalopolis, because it has so much history that makes it great. Something I wanted to address is how far south it really stretches. Some people say it ends at DC, some say it ends at Richmond, and others say it even stretches as far down as Norfolk. Now, starting with Richmond is pretty 50-50 for me. There's a good 30-mile stretch of rural between Fredericksburg and Richmond, which won't be there for long, but I do think it kind of ends the main megalopolis there for me. Now, I know earlier in the video I said they were definitely connected, and you won't be going into any areas where there's nothing there. But there aren't any major cities in this area. Personally, I feel like Richmond and Hampton Roads are more connected than Richmond and Washington, D.C., but that's just my opinion. Finally, I wanted to address public transportation in the Northeast because it stands above any other region in the U.S. New York has the most extensive subway system in the country. You have NEPTA, SEPTA, the Northeast Corridor, and so much more. In fact, this random usnews.com article I found says that out of the top 10 U.S. cities for public transportation, 7 of them are in the Northeast. Other areas in the country may be developing faster and gaining on the Northeast, but there's no denying this area has the rest of the U.S. beat by a mile for now. So the Northeast Megalopolis is the most iconic in the country, and goes hand in hand with the word megalopolis. I look forward to seeing how the region develops over the next 100 years, because maybe someday it won't be the jewels of America, and we'll have somewhere else take over. Thanks for watching. First of all, I wanted to say if you're still watching right now, please consider joining the Discord. The link is in the description. Basically a talking app, and if you want to say anything to me or ask any questions to anyone about geography, just join there. I also want to thank NS for doing these stats for this video. He puts a lot of work into getting that ready, so this video is very easy for me to make. I also want to thank the members, Karen Hudson 81, Stormy Knight, Nikita Martinoff, KMS 162, Zeus, Haystack, Benjamin Whiting, Ryan Devins, Hazev the Wolf, Jake Holloway, Somnam Woods, JL, Jeremy Crone, Carport, Dominic Psyche, Rosebud 4, and Bryce. I love you guys all so much. If you want to become a member, the link is in the description below. All the money for memberships literally just goes straight into my bank account so that I can save up for college and stuff. It's up to you. It's just an extra way to help. Thank you.